Grigori Rasputin did not merely die on December 30th, 1916. He survived an onslaught of poison, bullets, and bludgeons, fighting for his life with a ferocity that defied all natural laws, making his final moments perhaps the most disturbing and protracted death in all of human history. This wasn't a quick, clean murder. It was a desperate, almost mythological struggle between a man who refused to yield and conspirators consumed by terror, a macabre ballet that mirrored the dying days of an empire. Before that horrifying night, Rasputin was a name whispered with a mixture of fear, fascination, and contempt across Russia. Born a peasant in a remote Siberian village, he emerged from obscurity with piercing eyes, a charismatic presence, and an uncanny ability to connect with people, particularly women. He was a self-proclaimed holy man, a stronic or wanderer, whose mystical practices and alleged healing powers captivated those around him. But it was his unshakable influence over Empress Alexandra, the wife of Tsar Nicholas II, that truly sealed his fate. She believed he was the only one who could alleviate the suffering of her hemophiliac son, Alexei, the heir to the Russian throne. And her unwavering faith gave him unprecedented access and power within the highest echelons of the Romanov court. This was an era of profound superstition and deep-seated social anxieties, where the lines between religious fervor and manipulation blurred with alarming ease. His position as the Tsar's closest spiritual advisor, often referred to as the Mad Monk, quickly turned to a source of national scandal and a symbol of the monarchy's decay. Russia was already a nation on the brink, entangled in the devastating quagmire of World War I, suffering unimaginable losses and plagued by economic hardship. While soldiers froze and starved on the front lines, whispers of Rasputin's lecherous escapades, drunken prophecies, and manipulative advice to the Empress circulated through St. Petersburg. He was seen as a German agent by some, a black magician by others, but universally as a cancerous growth on the very soul of Russia. The nobility, the military, even some members of the royal family themselves watched in horror as his dark shadow seemed to fall over the entire imperial court. The very survival of the Romanov dynasty, they believed, depended on his removal. But how do you remove a man who seems untouchable, protected by the divine favor of the Empress herself? The answer came in the form of a small, desperate circle of plotters, led by the impeccably dressed, wealthy, and deeply aristocratic Prince Felix Yusupov. He was the wealthiest man in Russia outside of the Romanovs, married to the Tsar's niece, and infamous for his flamboyant lifestyle, often cross-dressing at parties. Alongside him was the Grand Duke Dmitry Pavlovich, a cousin of the Tsar, and Vladimir Purishkevich, an ultra-nationalist member of the Duma. These men, pillars of the establishment, convinced themselves that assassinating Rasputin was not merely murder, but a patriotic act, a desperate surgery to save the motherland from its accelerating decline. They believed they were instruments of God, tasked with a grim but necessary duty. Their resolve hardened with every fresh scandal attributed to the monk. The trap was laid at Yusupov's opulent Moika Palace in St. Petersburg, a grand edifice of Baroque luxury that would soon bear witness to unimaginable horror. Yusupov himself played the bait, cultivating a friendship with Rasputin, flattering him, earning his trust. On the night of December 29, 1916, Rasputin was invited to the palace for a late-night supper. The pretense was that Yusupov's beautiful wife, Princess Irina, would be there, a woman Rasputin had long expressed an interest in meeting. Of course, Irina was safely away in Crimea.
Instead, in the palace's half-lit cellar, a decadent room usually reserved for banquets, a gramophone played a jaunty tune, and a table was laden with treats. But these were no ordinary treats. Among the fine pastries, chocolates, and bottles of wine were items specially prepared with a deadly ingredient. 7 cyanide-laced cakes, enough poison to kill a dozen men, were arranged temptingly on a silver platter. Several glasses of Madeira wine were also spiked with the potent toxin. Yusupov, a man of refined tastes and delicate sensibilities, forced himself to endure the excruciating wait in the cellar, feigning small talk, his heart hammering against his ribs. He watched Rasputin like a hawk, every gesture, every sip, every bite magnified in the oppressive silence, punctuated only by the distant sounds of his co-conspirators pacing upstairs. The very air in that cellar must have felt thick with unspoken dread. Rasputin, oblivious or perhaps simply unconcerned, ate the cakes. He devoured them, one after another, seemingly enjoying the sweet confectionaries. Then he drank the poisoned wine. Yusupov watched, his breath catching in his throat, his hands clammy. He expected immediate convulsions, a violent collapse, the grim spectacle of a man dying from one of the most potent poisons known to man. But nothing happened. Rasputin merely smiled, asked for more, his eyes betraying no pain, no discomfort. He continued to chat, his coarse, hypnotic voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. A terrifying realization began to dawn on Yusupov. The poison wasn't working. Was this man truly invincible? Was he somehow protected by an unholy power, as many whispered? The fear that had fueled the plot now twisted into a cold, paralyzing dread. Hours passed, stretching into an eternity. Up in the drawing room, the other conspirators grew restless and suspicious, their nerves fraying with each tick of the clock. Yusupov, overcome by a desperate mounting panic, excused himself, stumbling upstairs to consult with his co-plotters. He described Rasputin's unnerving immunity, his calm demeanor despite consuming enough cyanide to fell an army. Their plan was failing spectacularly. Their only option, they decided, was to resort to more direct, brutal measures. Yusupov returned to the cellar, a heavy revolver now clutched in his hand. He approached Rasputin, who was still chatting amiably, perhaps even humming. Yusupov feigned a request for Rasputin to admire an old crucifix. As Rasputin turned, his back to the prince, perhaps caught off guard by the strange request, Yusupov raised the pistol. The crack of the shot shattered the silence of the night, echoing through the cold stone cellar. The bullet tore into Rasputin's left side, piercing his lung and hitting his liver. He screamed, a guttural cry of pain and surprise, then crumpled to the floor, a dark, spreading stain blooming on his tunic. Yusupov stood over him, trembling, convinced that the deed was finally done. Relief, raw and overwhelming, washed over him. The conspirators rushed down, a mix of grim satisfaction and nervous excitement on their faces. They stood over the body, poking it, checking for a pulse. Confident in their success, they ascended to the drawing room, leaving Rasputin on the cold floor, planning their next steps, how to dispose of the body. But an hour later, something impossible happened. Yusupov, returning to collect a coat, found Rasputin not merely stirring, but struggling. With a horrific, low growl, Rasputin's eyes snapped open. He lunged, a primal animalistic roar tearing from his throat, his bloodied hand reaching for Yusupov's neck. The prince broke free and fled upstairs, screaming, "He's alive! He's alive!" The monster, it seemed, truly refused to die. Chaos erupted. Rasputin, bleeding profusely, somehow dragged himself up the stairs, attempting to escape into the palace courtyard and out into the night. Purishkevich, grabbing his own revolver, ran out after him.
He fired once, missing. He fired again, striking Rasputin in the back. Rasputin stumbled but kept moving. A third shot hit him in the head.
He fell again, this time truly seeming to collapse. The conspirators, now a frenzied mob of terrified aristocrats, rushed him. They kicked him, beat him with a rubber bludgeon, hitting him repeatedly in the head until his face was a pulpy mess, his body limp and broken. It seemed impossible he could endure such a beating, yet the memory of his terrifying resurgence still haunted them. Convinced that this time he surely was dead, they wrapped his body in a heavy curtain, tied his feet and hands, and drove him to the frozen Neva River. It was a bitterly cold St. Petersburg night, the air biting, the snow thick. They forced his battered, seemingly lifeless form through a hole they had cut in the ice, plunging him into the frigid depths of the river. The water, a murky black under the moonless sky, swallowed him whole. They scattered his clothes, disposed of any evidence, and returned to their lavish lives, believing they had finally rid Russia of its demon. The nightmare, they thought, was over. But Rasputin's horrifying resistance wasn't quite finished. 2 days later, his body was discovered downstream. The autopsy performed by Professor Dmitry Kosaratov delivered the final, chilling revelation that cemented the legendary status of Rasputin's unkillability. His lungs were filled with water. This meant that despite the massive dose of cyanide, the multiple gunshots, and the brutal beating, Rasputin had still been alive when he was thrown into the icy river. He had fought, struggling for breath, in the freezing water for an agonizing period before succumbing to hypothermia and drowning. It was a death so drawn out, so violent, so utterly beyond the pale of normal human endurance that it only fueled the myths of his supernatural powers. The assassination, meant to save the monarchy, instead inadvertently hastened its demise. The imperial family was devastated, the empress inconsolable. Within weeks, the February Revolution would erupt, sweeping away the Romanov dynasty and plunging Russia into an even deeper abyss of chaos. Rasputin, the peasant mystic who had woven his way into the heart of the Russian Empire, became a grotesque symbol of its final, agonizing throes. His legend, born from his life of alleged miracles and depravity, was cemented by his utterly unbelievable death. He was the man who refused to die, a monstrous figure whose final, desperate struggle in a freezing river echoed the last gasp of an ancient empire. His unyielding fight against death itself serves as a chilling testament to the desperate power of belief, fear, and sheer, raw will.